What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. And thank you guys for tuning in to tonight's video or today's video, whenever you guys are tuning in or listening to this. We got some more news to talk about. The CFL offseason is hot and heavy, as I said last video. If you guys missed that one, just a little bit of a reaction to the news of Ryan Rigmaiden, the Vernon Adams trade, kind of the early thoughts of kind of my, I guess, thoughts. Blake actually wasn't able to join us, so maybe we'll get a little bit of Blake's thoughts here tonight. But as most of the time, joined by my right-hand man, Blake. Blake, thanks for joining me, buddy. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Saw that I had a text from you when I got off the phone, and you were like, "What are you doing tonight? You want to record a show?" And I was like, "Yeah, like that's kind of a weird time to record a show, but you know me, like I'm almost always down." And then I pulled up my Facebook, and all of a sudden I had seen the Lions had hired Buck Pierce, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's why Cole wants to do a show. That makes a lot more sense now." But yeah, definitely came out of left field a little bit today, as I believe they had interviews yesterday, or Monday, December 2nd, whenever you're tuning into this. The three finalists were kind of broken by John Hodge and Farhan Lalji. And then, like I said, kind of out of left field today, like later on in the afternoon, the Lions announced that Buck Pierce was going to be the new head coach, the 28th head coach in BC Lions history.
Yes, so a lot of things to talk about. I guess I mentioned on social media earlier, a lot of layers that I think go into this and how you want to, think about it, whether you're a Lions fan, CFL fan, heck, even maybe you're a Buck Pierce fan. Um, I think you and I probably share similarly, which is probably not great for entertainment and for rooting, debating purposes, but we will see. Maybe we will feel a little bit differently about it. But before we get into the Buck Pierce hire for the BC Lions, Blake, as I mentioned, you weren't able to join us. I know you're a little under the weather, buddy, going through some stuff. How do you feel about obviously Vernon Adams getting dealt to Calgary, all that sort of situation? I know obviously you've been a long time VA guy and been able to meet him and introduce him to Jack and all that sort of stuff and get pictures with them. And I know how much he meant to you. So just what are your thoughts on just that whole deal going down? And good to see VA land on his feet.
Yeah, I mean it's as a fan, it's the shitty part of being a fan. Like we knew it was coming. I'm not gonna lie, there was a small part of me that a little bit hoped the quarterback controversy, carousel, whatever you want to call it, went the other way, and maybe Nathan Rourke was the one. Um, I don't know how else to put this politely, but like was shown the door. But obviously, if you look at it from a realistic standpoint, that was never going to be the case. Like his salary was prorated this year, so he's making whatever he made for the final 10 games or whatever it was. And then he is now starting the 2025 season on that 3-year contract that is paying him a significant amount of money, 500,000 plus the marketing money and everything like that. So it was never a realistic situation that Nathan Rourke was going to go out the door. It was pretty clear that VA was going to be the one that left. That was made even more evident to me at the very beginning of Grey Cup week. Just kind of at the beginning of Grey Cup week, I was actually at YVR Airport when I just so happened to bump into David Mackey, kind of say hello. Um, Sorry that the season ended the way it did and everything like that. And I said to David Mackey, I was like, it's gonna suck seeing VA leave, like the great person, the great leader he is. And David Mackey kind of turned to me and he's like, "Yeah, it is, but that's part of the business." And that was like the final confirmation that I needed. Even though, as I said, I kind of knew what the scenario was, but that was the final confirmation that I needed that VA was not going to return to the BC Lions in 2025. The deal itself, I was a little disappointed. Like I know that Calgary has the first overall pick, so it was kind of it was never a foregone conclusion that they were going to get the first round pick from the Calgary Stampeders. And if you step back and look at it, Really, realistically, it basically is a first round pick, as the Lions are going to lose their first round pick due to going over the salary in 2024. But the Stampeders had the very first pick of the second round. So it basically just turns into a late first round pick, ninth overall in the Canadian draft, another draft pick in 2025, and I believe 2026 was the third draft pick exchanged. So yeah, it's good to see VA land on his feet. Like I said, as a person, as a fan, I hate to see him leave, but as you and I are trying to break our way into the media business, unfortunately, it's part of the business. Like, you get to know these people as people. You don't want to see them leave, but you also know that it's professional sports and it's a business. And sometimes business decisions need to be made, and unfortunately, for people like myself, that means seeing one of your favorite players go and play for a different team.
Yeah, well said. I'm glad that you brought up the, that it does kind of turn into a late first round pick with BC likely losing their first round pick. You, Shane, Coach, and I have that little group chat going on, and kind of usually Shane is more predominantly the one that's bringing stuff up in the group and news wise. And obviously, when the whole situation went down, I kind of had a little back and forth with Shane, just not being too surprised with, at first kind of being like, man, seeing the return, that was a little bit underwhelming. But thinking back to, when they basically made it kind of public without kind of, officially saying that VA was going to get traded, we think back to the season-ending press conferences for both, VA and Nathan. It was kind of made clear that, Vernon was going to be the guy that was going to get traded, and at that point, as a Lions, you kind of lose all leverage as the trade partner in that situation when you know from the other 8 teams that BC owes Vernon Adams obviously the big bonus that was coming up here in January. You know that can't be on BC's cap hit going into next year with Nathan's salary going up, so knowing that the Lions are going to have to move off them as quickly as possible, move off Vernon as quickly as possible to try to get the best return. I'm guessing this was probably likely their best return that was available on the board for them. So not wanting to risk not getting even less of a return. Let's take this now. I think they probably would have liked to maybe see if they could have moved him out of division. I would be absolutely shocked if the second game of the year, obviously the first game of the year is probably going to be Winnipeg and Toronto, the Grey Cup rematch. But I would be shocked if the CFL doesn't open up the season and it's Calgary and BC on that Friday night. Whether it's in BC, whether it's in Calgary, we'll see. But it's going to be an interesting one. I'm really glad that VA kind of it happened nice and early for him. He was can go enjoy his offseason. I know he mentioned and can enjoy the holidays as well. He doesn't have to really don't know, I guess actually is probably the better way to put it, where he's going to be, who he's going to be traded to, that sort of situation. He can kind of handle his business now, go back, enjoy his Christmas and holidays with his family, and then I would imagine come back and get ready to work in Calgary here. And like I said in the last video, I'm sure you share similar feelings. Just will always be a fan of Vernon Adams no matter what for the rest of his career now, just the way he handled himself this year. And, shout out to VA. And I guess one last time, go Lions. Before, who knows what happens? I was curious to know if they're going to maybe he has a new Go Stamps or something when he's with Calgary. New slogan, a new saying. But Blake, I guess let's get into the 17th general manager. What are your thoughts on Ryan Rigmaiden being named new general manager of the BC Lions?
Yeah, I'm really excited. Everyone that I've talked to is also very excited. You and I kind of teased it on our last weekly show a couple weeks ago that I believe it would have just been announced then that Rick Campbell had been let go, and that Neil McAvoy had moved into kind of the president of football ops operation. And Neil McAvoy, even in his press conference, said how important it was that it wasn't really like it's not really him letting go of the GM position because he wanted to let go of the GM position. It's because they didn't want to lose Ryan Rigmaiden at all. They made that evidently clear. Ryan Rigmaiden made the feelings mutual when the Elks asked him to interview for their GM job, And the Lions gave him permission. They said, you know what, go ahead if that's what you want to do. And Ryan himself said, you know what, Edmonton, sorry, BC's my home. I'm going to stay here in BC.
I think that takes a lot of, I don't know if you wanna say guts or I don't know if balls is the right way to say it, but at the time, he has no idea that BC is gonna give him the job, right? Obviously,
Hmm.
I'm sure he has a, a feeling and an inclination that, maybe BC is, interested in his services, but at the time, right, like, they could go eat like, they can go any way. They don't necessarily have to just promote him. They could have left him as the US director of scouting. Um, you know, I'm sure Amara was probably pretty high on working with around Ryan Rigmaiden the last 2 or 3 years since Mars took it over. But considering that he turned down like not a for sure yes job, but they wanted to interview him and thought highly of him. But carry on there, Blake.
Yeah, no. So it's just it's very exciting to see Ryan Rigmaiden as the assistant GM. He was kind of in the background for the last few years. So I'm excited to see what he does with this team. We know guys like Nathan Rourke are going to come back. And then after that, it's kind of up in the air. Like a lot of our big name players, I know we're going to go over this a little later on, but guys like Justin McInnes is an unrestricted free agent. Both of our running backs in William Stanback and Jeshwin Antwi are unrestricted free agents. So Ryan Rigmainen, maybe he's going to enjoy the holidays, but when January 1 or January 2 or January 7th, 8th, whenever he decides to go back to work comes around, he's going to have a lot of work to do and he's not going to have a lot of time to do it. So I'm excited to see him in the public eye, his stamp of approval on this team. Um, they said Grey Cup or bust this year. Obviously, that wasn't the case, losing in the West semifinal to the Lions, or to the Riders, I should say. Pardon me. But maybe that helps out the Lions next year. A little bit less expectations. Who knows? We'll see what the offseason brings. I mean, it's a long 6 months, but maybe people start sleeping on the Lions to start 2025. And maybe the Nathan Rourke of old, or you and I have talked about this before, not necessarily the Nathan Rourke of old, because I don't think he'll ever be able to duplicate what he did in 2022. But even if he's 75%, 80% of that Nathan Rourke that he was in 2022, that Lions team is a heck of a beast to be dealing with in 2025.
Yes, a lot of angles to cover the Ryan Rigmaiden one. I'm glad that you mentioned Neil McAvoy. He basically gets promotion by demotion. Obviously, the assistant general manager alongside Rick Campbell gets taken out of that seat. Although I would kind of say that it's just by title. Neil McAvoy handling a lot of the Canadian scouting. Ryan Rigmain, U.S. Director of Scouting for the BC Lions for the last number of years. I believe he spent some time with Winnipeg as well. I would imagine that he will have a say and have a hand in the CFL draft and scouting those Canadians. But Neil McAvoy has been the guy that's been handling that process for a number of years now. I would imagine he'll continue to have that say and have those a sizable input, I would think, come, draft in April, and kind of scouting that area. And then they kind of tag team um, on who they want to bring together, not just have, one person kind of calling the shots, similar to a co-general manager kind of deal, but just without the title. But, I just wanted to mention this as well. Ryan Rigmain, they mentioned in the press conference of, he mentioned, I don't want to be cocky, but, I kind of want to continue to be a scout because that's what I'm good at. And Neil McAvoy was quick to, he's not being cocky by any means. These are some of the names that, throughout the last 14 years that he's been credited as, he's kind of brought to the team. He scouted and, kind of put his name on the line and wanted to bring these numerous amount of names into either BC or Winnipeg. We'll start with just former players. Brian Burnham, I guess current TJ Lee, former player Alex Bazzi, Jamarcus Hardrick, obviously cut by the Lions way back in, I believe, 2015, AC Leonard, RIP Craig Rowe, Luchez Purifoy, Jonathan Jennings, some current ones now, Lucky Whitehead, Keon Hatcher, Josh Banks, Jarrell Broxton, some Winnipeg Blue Bombers now current ones, Marcus Sales, Kenny Lawler, Janarian Grant, Rasheed Bailey. So, and I'm sure there's a few more that just aren't in kind of the upper echelon in terms of names that he's found. So, a guy that's been very good at finding, guys throughout the U.S. scouting kind of which is almost a secondary kind of way of kind of adding to your team throughout the. You start kind of with the Canadians and wanting to make sure that you fill those roles as best as possible because you obviously have to start a certain amount of them and kind of build your roster from there. So if you're able to kind of find them, those players that are, you don't really have to bid for. You can kind of go out and find those
Mhm.
players and, pitch why you want to bring them into your team. If Ryan Rigmaiden is good at that, has a track record of doing that, I'm really excited to see where he's gonna end up as a full time general manager. So, Blake, let's get into more of a little bit of a off-season primer, buddy. So we'll talk about kind of Ryan Rigmaiden, Buck Pierce. We'll talk about the direction I think that they might want to take this team. Nathan Mark obviously has QB1 and the list of free agents and maybe some free agents that we look around the league at maybe wanting to bring into BC. So let's start with Buck Pierce and being named the 28th head coach of the BC Lions. As I mentioned on social media and earlier, I think there is a lot of layers, and I think where you and I both agree is that it's just probably way too early to have this
Mhm.
discussion. I would still love it if people would like to have this discussion with us. So let us know down below in the comments, on Instagram, on Twitter, how you guys feel. Because Blake and I probably feel similar. So it kind of eliminates that debate element. So we'd love to hear maybe a different angle. I think it's just way too early because this team is, as you said, who knows what the heck this team is going to look like in a month's time with all the free agents that are on this team, all the incoming players that could be coming on this team when it comes to free agents, new players to the CFL. I think that's still way too early because there's not really a direction quite yet, right? Obviously, we bring back a guy like William Stanback. I think there's still kind of a, wanting to run the ball a little bit more. If we maybe tend to lean towards away from that, maybe we want to sling the ball around, right? Which I think there's still a little bit of a wait and see aspect of what this team is going to be like, philosophy wise. We also currently don't have a defensive coordinator. I believe Farhan Lalji reported that there's only one. He didn't also mention that said coach, but there's only one said coach that's under current contract right now for the BC Lions, outside of Buck Pierce. I don't, like I said, I don't know, I don't have a name on that, but Jordan Maximic is not coming back. I know there was
Yeah.
some questions asked if Jordan Maximic would be coming back as offensive coordinator. We'll just kind of end this debate now. Buck Pierce will be calling plays. I know that is difficult for a head coach, but I would just, it's kind of similar to, Ryan Dinwiddie going over to Toronto, calling plays for himself, Jason Maas as well. That's kind of your bread and butter. It's similar to Ryan Rigmaiden getting to a general manager spot through scouting. He's going to continue to scout because that's what's got him there. Buck Pierce has got his spot here because of his being able to call offensive plays. So I would imagine for at least the first year, maybe he finds that he has to be, a little bit more focused on a team, on the team as a whole, and can't really focus on calling plays more. But I would imagine he's going to want to call plays, look towards. I would think Ryan Phillips should still be in play for coming back as defensive coordinator. Number one, they played together, they won a Grey Cup together. I think Ryan Phillips is a guy that can handle that side of the ball and kind of you can give him the responsibility of almost running his own ship in a sense of that's your kind of your fleet, if you will. You kind of make sure the defense is good. I'll worry about the offense. Maybe even you bring in a guy like Mike Benavides, and it's kind of you can kind of focus on almost having three miniature head coaches at different roles, but no current defensive coordinator on the roster. I think that kind of changes things schematically. What we want to do next year defensively. So, what are your thoughts on Buck Pierce being named head coach of the BC Lions, Blake?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, Cole, that it is way too early to tell. Recency bias does scare me a little bit with Buck Pierce. And you're like, people might be thinking, well, it's just this Grey Cup. Like, Buck Pierce didn't have a didn't have a great game. The Bombers ended up losing. But like, look at they turned around a 0-4 and a 2-6 start. But for me, it's not just the last Grey Cup, the one that was played just over 2.5 or just almost 2.5 weeks ago. It's all five of the Grey Cups that the Bombers have been in, save for maybe the first one where they blew Hamilton out. That was a well called game by Buck Pierce. But other than that, the rematch against Hamilton 2 years later, they had to leave that to overtime. And then the last two Grey Cups, or the last three Grey Cups, I should say, all losses for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have just been not good enough from a Zach Colaro standpoint, first and foremost. And secondly, in last year and this year, not good enough from a Brady Oliveira standpoint. So it's just befuddling to see that Buck Pierce, he was so heck bent on running the ball in the regular season. And then when it came to the Grey Cup, the biggest game of the year, he just abandons the run. Like there's been stories that have come out since the Grey Cup that Zach Claros, his finger was almost hanging off when he had to get stitched up in that Grey Cup game a couple weeks ago. And the very first play call with it when he comes back into the game was a deep shot. It was not a smart call from Buck Pierce. But again, I think that's recency bias. um, Buck Pierce, he was a heck of a quarterback when he was here in BC. And as an offensive coordinator, if you take away those 5 Grey Cups, he has been a heck of an offensive coordinator for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So I think he deserves this shot, and we need to give him time. We need to see what happens with this football team. Give it a month, give it 2 months to start the year. It might not start out great. Like this is kind of the Lions when they fired Rick Campbell and Neil McAvoy moved into the president of football operations side. The Lions were kind of saying they were okay with possibly rebuilding, trying to get to where they want to be. So, like a guy like Corey Mace, we saw what happened this year. The Riders started out like a house on fire. They went through that stretch in the middle of the year where they lost, or well, they didn't win. I believe it was 7 games in a row. And then at the end of the year, they come out like a house on fire again, and they end up falling one step short of the Grey Cup. So give Buck Pierce time. Let him implement his philosophies. Let him get the team he wants, and we will see what happens after that.
Yes. A lot of layers, Blake. A lot of layers to this conversation. I'm glad that you mentioned recency bias because I think a lot of not only BC Lions fans, but I think the CFL community was very, flabbergasted by. I think Brady only had 9 total carries. I think it was 11 touches in the Grey Cup,
Yeah.
which is just unacceptable. I also said that in the little group chat today. Recency bias is obviously one thing, but thinking back to 2 years ago, I was asking for Buck Pierce. He was obviously the hot name, the new young offensive coordinator, young mind in the CFL. I believe last year was it in 2023. He got to interview with Saskatchewan.
Hmm.
Obviously, didn't end up getting that job. Whether it was Saskatchewan turning down or electing to go with Coach Mace or not, still was amongst the head coaches that were being talked about to possibly be new head coaches in the CFL. And my lack of kind of the Grey Cup struggles dating back to the 2019. Obviously, you said that one was a little bit better, and just not having a lot of recollection coming back to me now. I think back to obviously the most recent one. He's also not the one not to kind of post finger injury. He's also not the one that threw 4 interceptions with
Hmm.
Zach Collaros, and I think Zach, you were probably the one to almost lead that charge with, me being one of them that, Zach's gonna come back to being like Zach. Zach's gonna he'll come back to being looking like Zach. And he never really did other than the one game he threw for the 6 touchdowns and I think it was 400 or 500 yards, whatever it was. I think that was the game that everyone was like, see, that's Zach. And other than that, he really looked not like himself for all like it's not an over exaggeration to say all of this year, and I think it's pretty legitimate to ask those questions going into next year, like who are we going to get at quarterback for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers? Like what Zach Collaros are we going to get? We talked about it multiple times. It was the 17-16, 17-10, whatever the game was
Hmm.
there before everything started to go south for Winnipeg. Whether it was harder or not because of the lack of giving Brady the ball. Buck did have his team in place to win that game in the fourth quarter. Had his
Yep.
offense within a one-score game. Zach Collaros and that situation is an absolute debacle, unfortunately, unacceptable on both the not understanding that Zach's hurt and not giving the ball to your most outstanding player and most outstanding Canadian in this entire CFL, just given the award 3 days beforehand and you completely abandon him. So I agree that I think recency bias, it creeps into your mind like, man, like can that happen as a head coach? Like where now he has that added responsibility, right? Of like he doesn't have to like look at Mike O'Shea and kind of get the look of approval. He can just do it because he's the guy in charge now, right? And will that cost us in a big game where it's a West final, a Grey Cup, a West semifinal? It definitely makes you kind of wonder. But as you said, I think it's way too early. Let's let him get his roster. Let's let him get his team. Let's let him go through his struggles, and let's let him. The one thing that Ryan Rigmaiden brought up is the lack of being able to get through some adversity. Having some adversity and getting through it is what he mentioned is I think kind of the biggest hamper of this year's BC Lions, the 2024 version of the BC Lions. So I think also we saw it this year, right? The BC Lions started like gangbusters, 6-1, 5-1, whatever it was. We hit a little bit of adversity, and we didn't. We almost looked like, man, like what the heck do we do? Like we've never been here before. When it's like you have to kind of like almost thrive in those situations where it's like, man, like ups and downs, peaks and valleys. That's gonna happen, right? Like the season. I always kind of like, yeah, I don't know how I don't kind of use it more in CFL and with the BC Lions, but like with the Bills, I try my best not to ride the roller coaster of a long NFL season because there are a lot of ups and there's a lot of downs. It's the same way in the CFL in a season where there's going to be a lot of ups, there's going to be a lot of downs, there's going to be some even points, there's going to be a lot of those, but making sure you're having your your high points at the end of the year when it's playoff time and stuff like that is I think most important. And let's see what Buck Pierce can do around then, because obviously with the 5 teams in the West, there's good odds that hopefully he can get us in the playoffs once again. And once you get in the playoffs, anything can happen. Get your ticket to the dance, and anything can happen. I'm definitely interested to see what kind of Buck wants to do in terms of culture wise. They mentioned in the few articles of kind of wanting to borrow. I don't know if maybe that was mentioned in the quote. Maybe it's a little bit, maybe not the right word, but borrowing that culture that Winnipeg's kind of created there with Mike O'Shea and
Mhm.
bringing a little bit over that with Buck in his own ways. And I think that should be another interesting one as well, where I think he'll be a little bit more of a boisterous head coach. Where I think not that Rick wasn't, but I think that the speeches and stuff like that really weren't kind of Rick's things, which is cool. Also, that doesn't have to be a head coach thing, but I also think that can motivate a team, can get a guy to another level when it's those hard games where you're down by a score or two and you go to the locker room at halftime and maybe if you're Rick, right, you kind of lean on your leaders to kind of like step in the locker room and be like, hey man, like this shit isn't acceptable, which is totally cool because your players in that locker room are going to be able to do that. But sometimes you don't. Like a guy like Nathan versus VA is totally different leading wise, right? Where VA is a very boisterous leader, a very comfortable person, like talking in front of the group, where Nathan is a little bit more opposite, right? Where maybe a guy like Buck Pierce, maybe you have to be the boisterous leader, where you have to kind of be the guy that's like, hey man, like shit's not acceptable right now, right? And like you have to step in and be that guy and kind of, this is not to our standard, to our culture. So I'm curious to see what Buck can do in that aspect as well. So time will tell. I think it's way too early to kind of sway one way or another, whether it's a good fit, a bad fit. We talked about obviously the lack of success in Grey Cups, especially the last 3 years. I would say as we kind of talked about as well, last 3 or 4 MOPs have been on that offense. Last
Mhm.
with Zach Caleros 2021, 22, and then Brady this year in 2024. So the track record's there. They have a good offense in the regular season. I would expect them to have a great offense in the regular season next year, them being the BC Lions. But I think it's probably fair to say now it's like our expectations are come November, man. Like we want to see it in playoff football now from now on. We've had great regular seasons for the last 3 years. Going into next year, it should hopefully be 4, where like we're amongst the the best in the CFL. Obviously, this year didn't go the way we wanted. I still think you and I probably both agree that this team is much better than the way they went out and their
All
record
right.
portrayed. They had the horses to go all the way. I believe that. I truly do. Now things happen. Guys are paid just like the BC Lions on the other side of the field, right? Where they're not going to want to roll over and let the Lions win because the Grey Cup's being played in Vancouver. So I'm curious to see what happens this year. A lot of free agents, and maybe that's where we want to talk or go to now. Blake, is there any other thoughts on Buck Pierce before we get out of here, or I
No,
guess
I
move
just
on?
think, yeah, no, I just think it's kind of interesting. I believe it was and I can't remember the name, but I believe it was someone in the Calgary media that stated that the two newest head coaches in the CFL, with Mark Killam in Edmonton and now Buck Pierce here in BC, are both first
100%.
time head coaches. So that's very exciting to see. I made my opinion very clear to you, Shane, Coach, all those guys when Mike Benavides, our friend Will from Toronto as well, when Mike Benavides was mentioned as a finalist, and I was like, Cole, like you and I lived through that. Can we not do that again? Like, isn't there anyone else that is available for the BC Lions head coaching position? So I will admit, like in full transparency, I kind of looked at that finalist list because it was Jordan Maximic, Buck Pierce, and Mike Benavides, and I was like, yeesh, like none of these names really stand out to me. But the more you step back and look at it, like I think truly Buck Pierce was the best option for the job. The Lions got the man they wanted. Let's let him get to work.
Yeah, and Farhan Lalji obviously mentioned that they wanted to prioritize the offensive side of the football and trying to get back on track with Nathan Rourke and trying to fix that first and foremost. I will say, last on the head coaching position, I'm just very curious if there's anybody listening, if by chance Farhan Lalji is listening, any other insiders, why Ryan Phillips wasn't mentioned more as a candidate. Obviously, he was in the 7 or 8 names to begin with. I would think that they gave him the courtesy of going through that interview process. But I just think he would have been kind of like a great candidate for a head coach. Now, if I was to be told that, like Farhan mentioned, they just wanted to go offensive, priority, I would say, okay, I totally understand that. And I would just hope that they wanted to bring him back in any capacity. Well, not in any capacity um, as his DC, but you know, as you said, I think this is probably the right direction they went with Buck Pierce. Jordan Maximic was a tough one because I think recency bias probably is the similar to Buck Pierce, where we're like, eesh, like things didn't really go great. But we think back to going back to 2022, phenomenal seasons. Was one of the other hot offensive coordinator young names out there. I think if it wasn't for Buck Pierce, his name would have been up there talked about a little bit more. But it was just waiting for that domino to fall, waiting for Buck Pierce to get hired. Buck Pierce now gets hired. I think he's going to be that top offensive name that's out there. Interviewed with the Elks for their head coaching position. Obviously, that's not going to happen. I'm still kind of probably thinking that he's going to end up as their offensive coordinator is my guess, but
Yeah,
we will
Farhan has
see.
reported that as well.
Yeah, we will see. That's nothing official quite yet. But as far as the head coaching role, we have ours, Buck Pierce. We have a general manager, Blake. We have a direction to go. Now it's time to get into free agency, buddy. A little bit of fun. Who we're going to be spending money on, who we're going to be wanting to go after, which should be interesting. Lastly, on Buck Pierce, obviously, he spent the last 10 years with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Longtime BC Lion, part of the, what was it, 2006 Grey Cup. Obviously was, you know, frenemy, I guess, if you want to say, 2011 Grey Cup or foe, with leading the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in that Grey Cup. And thankfully for us, we won it. So he was on the wrong side of that one. So only one-time Grey Cup champion. I believe he's, I think it's like 8th or 10th in terms of all-time completions for the BC Lions, in like 35 games. I think he's like 8th or 10th, one of the two. You could flop those rankings or switch them. He's top 10 in yards and completions all time for the BC Lions, which is super cool in only 35 games. A guy that's kind of been there and done that, so it's kind of cool to he can kind of in the fire. He's been in those situations, right? Which is I think an added bonus as a head coach. So should we get into free agency, Blake, and talk about maybe some guys that hopefully are going to be BC Lions next year? Blake, should we start with I guess we should start with our free agents first before guys that we would like maybe across the CFL. I will say shout out to Shane Ryan, good buddy of ours, obviously partner of the CFF Weekly Show. Shane for putting together the list this year of CFL free agents. Now, obviously, some of those are starting to be signed now, so it's actually if I mention a name that maybe got signed, I don't think any of them have anything to do with the Lions or anything that I want to sign, but maybe you do. Um, Forgive us. Let's start with the BC Lions upcoming free agents list. So that will be for this upcoming 2024-2025 offseason. So We have currently no quarterbacks on free or in free agency, Blake. So I believe we'll have two quarterbacks on the roster with probably wanting to add probably two or three more, even if they're just camp body or camp arms, to come compete in camp. And then, as you mentioned, actually, I guess including David Mackey. I don't know if you want to. Maybe we'll just call him a back. But there's three backs that are free agents: the two running backs, Joshua Antwi and William Stanback, and then David Mackey, fullback. All three guys will be free agents. Blake, I think this is probably a good time to talk about this position. Do you want one, two, or all these guys back? And how do you feel about this running back, or I guess running back slash fullback position?
Yeah, I mean, if it was up to me, I would want all three of them back. But if we're being realistic, can you get all three back? That's not a guarantee. So I would take two of the three. And it was no disrespect to Jeshwin Antwi. But even after he got traded, he really didn't do anything for the BC Lions. I can only think of a handful of plays where he was even on the field for. So I would let him walk. The two big ones for me are William Stanback and David Mackey. I think you have to re-sign both of those guys.
Yeah, I think David Mackey's a must as well. Just a pivotal locker room glue guy, whatever you want to say it. And like, I don't know if it's a hot take, but it like best short yardage quarterback in the CFL. Like, is that? I
He's
think
pretty
that's
close.
like, I mean, Chris Streveler's probably mentioned up there, rightfully so. Had a lot of touchdowns this year. Uh, is a weapon. I don't want to take that away from him, but like David Mackey, man, like really great in the situation. Started off not so great with I believe fumbling maybe his first attempt. I think in the situation in the
Yeah,
quarter
something like that.
short yardage quarter situation, which is like, man, things could not get off to any worse. And then from that point on, it was just fantastic. Took some short yardage situations to the house from 20, 30 yards out. I think a guy that is very pivotal in bringing back William Stanback. I am nervous, Blake, that he's going to be in the red and silver, red and white, whatever you want to call it, joining Vernon Adams because number one, that's his boy. He brought him over from Montreal. And VA, as we know, is one heck of a recruiter. And they, too, have both running backs, free agents as well. So Peyton Logan and why am I drawing a blank right now on the other
Uh,
name? But Dedrick Mills.
yeah,
Dedrick Mills and Peyton Logan um, are both free agents for Calgary, so they will be in the market of either bringing one or both of them back, or bringing in a new toy that would I think please their new quarterback as well. So we will soon see. Let's hope that maybe William Stanback enjoyed his time here in Vancouver with the BC Lions and wants to continue to build. I think he would thrive with a guy like Nathan Rourke, like similar to like he did with Vernon Adams, a guy that's going to get him the ball, being able to run the ball as well. I think is a huge asset for the BC Lions and uh, an offensive coordinator and quarterback, the tandem with Buck Pearson and Nathan Rourke, I think would like to have a number one back. So we will soon see, buddy. Receivers, one big, big, big name, and it's a glaring one, and that's about it for receivers. So we know who's coming back. Um, I would hope potentially that there's going to be some maybe negotiating and discussion to the other members in the receiving corps, a la Keon Hatcher and Alex Hollins, to maybe potentially give some money back. I know that's obviously not a thing that players like to do, but if they could help out the team in any way, I think that would be greatly needed in bringing back Justin McInnis. I don't need to hide this from you, Blake. This is a must bring back for me
yep.
personally. I think you probably share similar feelings, but why, I guess, do you feel similar feelings that this is a must bring back in Justin McInnis?
The fact that he had almost 1,500 yards this year, and it was like, um, that's to put it in simplest terms, but he was the best receiver in the CFL by far. in the first 9, 10 weeks of the season.
Could
He
argue he
took,
was the best Canadian.
yeah, and he was like, and he the last 7, 8 games weren't his best. But I talked about this on the weekly show, the last one or the second to last one. I can't remember which one, but it was like everyone around the CFL is like, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about Justin McInnes as much as you did at the beginning of the year. Like he's not doing as good. It's the fact that he wasn't getting 250-yard games anymore. But that doesn't mean he wasn't doing good. Like he was still constantly catching passes, getting over 100 yards in a game. So he just wasn't living up to the standards that he had set for himself at the beginning of the year. But the fact that he was still getting over 100 yards, like most weeks, most receivers would take over 100 yards. Like if you went up to a receiver at the beginning of the season and you said in all 17 games, you're going to have over 100 yards, you're going to have 1,700 yards at the end of the season, would the receivers take it? I guarantee you, every single receiver in the CFL would say yes, absolutely. So for that reason alone, the Lions need to re-sign Justin McInnes.
I'm just gonna say one thing. Justin McInnes is going like this, people. He is only going on an upward trajectory. Breakout year this year. We saw it a little bit last year. He comes over from Saskatchewan, kind of like an afterthought in terms of like the CFL free agents. Like, who wanted this guy? Like, he didn't really do much in Sask. Had the few good games in Sask against BC. I think was his career game up until the coming over to BC. Comes over to BC right away is like noticeably like, man, like this guy is really good. And it was obviously, it was fortunately due to the Dominic Rhymes injury that happened in 2023. He goes down. Justin McInnes gets put in the lineup, and it was like right away chemistry with Vernon Adams. And Vernon Adams was going to him. It was like, man, who the heck is this guy? And I was, thinking back to 2023, still Brian Burnham on the team. Excuse me, a lot of good receivers. Lucky Whitehead. So it's kind of like, man, there was a lot of mouths to feed. Keon Hatcher was having his all star type season. And then it's like, man, like there's only a one ball to go around. They obviously make the decision in the offseason to go away from a guy like Dominic Rhymes, cut Lucky Whitehead, Brian Burnham retires. There's all of a sudden a big opening in the BC Lions offense, and the Lions made it very clear that they wanted to have Justin McInnes be that guy. You need to not let this guy get out of your building. As soon as you can, bring him back, whatever deal you want, whether that's losing, guys that we're going to talk about, Matthew Betts, William Stanback, whoever. This is priority number one for me. I don't know if you feel that, if you kind of agree with that, but priority number one for me is Justin McInnes, and we'll figure it out from there. Make him if he wants to be the highest paid receiver, make him the highest paid receiver. Let's make sure that we have a number one receiver for our quarterback, because if we don't, no offense to Hatch, but Hatch coming off, the Achilles injury, I think we both hope that he's going to maybe return to form, but it's not a guarantee at his age. And with those type of injuries, like it's not a, we kind of like scoff at it and like think that it's gonna, oh, like that happens all the time because the guys do it now, but it's like that's not like 10 years ago. Tearing your ACL or tearing your Achilles was like game over. Like that was
Yeah.
career ending injuries. And now, like, because of technology and recovery and all that sort of stuff, it's become a little bit more normal for guys to come back, where it's like normal people like you and me, like that happens to us. It's like no bueno, man. Like, so I'm definitely a little bit more cautiously optimistic, I guess I would say, on Hatch. I'm definitely hopeful that he's going to maybe be similar to, the Keon Hatch that we remember of 2023, but it's not promised by any means that he's going to return to number one receiver status. Alex Hollins, I think, is probably a bona fide number one receiver, but I think he's more likely a one kind of B slash, that two kind of that tweener between a legitimate number one receiver and a really good number two receiver. If you can have the pair of, we saw it, of Alex Hollins taking turns at the 200 yards, Alex Hollins having a big game versus Winnipeg, Justin McInnes coming back having 200 yard game the game after. So I think having that 1-2 punch is very important. And bringing a guy like Justin McInnes is just mandatory, a must for me, Blake. So let's get into probably the most talked about position for you and I all season, and a position that I was very critical of and was very vocal on of what I wanted to do, wanted to have done going into this offseason. That's the offensive line and the free agents that are on the offensive line, Blake. So that starts with Canadians Suk Chung, Michael Couture, David Neville, Andrew Pearson, and then Americans Kent Perkins and Chris Slugger. So you look at that list, three starters for sure, but all those guys, all six of those guys, played snaps for the BC Lions this year in pretty meaningful capacity. David Neville was named starting left guard out of camp. Obviously, that was kind of a winding door all year. Andrew Pearson getting his opportunity, Chris Slugger as well, Woodruff as well. There's multiple names being played at left guard. Um, Sue Chung obviously is going to be our right guard. Mike Couture center. Andrew Pearson, kind of that swing guy, but I think another guy that's really important, similar to David Mackey, a very locker room guy, a culture bringer. And then Chris Slugger, I think, is a guy, as well as Kent Perkins, very interested to see what kind of happens with those guys. But I've been very vocal. I think they need to try to, upgrade this offensive line. It's unfortunate that it's not a guarantee, especially with the offensive line position. It's just hard to find 300-pound bodies that are, athletic and nimble enough to block guys that are freak athletes on the other side of the field, than be defensive linemen. But Blake, what do you think about the list of free agent offensive linemen, and maybe who are some names that you'd like to bring back?
Yeah, I think first of all, that's so scary. I didn't realize that there was that many offensive linemen up for free agency. But the two names for me, one is kind of on a personal basis, but would be Andrew Pearson and Chris Schleger that the Lions desperately need to re-sign. Andrew Pearson, as you said, he's kind of the culture, the locker room guy. He's been here for, I think he might even be the longest tenured Lion now, for the last like 5, 6 years, I want to say. And Chris Slugger, he was not played enough. You and I talked about that enough throughout the course of the season. But when he was played during the season, he played the position very, very well. So I feel like the Lions can't afford to lose him either.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, Blake, because they can either kind of go one way and bring some similar, a lot of the similar guys back, and try to get better, or try to get to another level, or it could be a new regime, and they could totally flip this thing on its head and try to go in a totally different direction. I think outside of Jarrell Broxton, obviously Jarrell Broxton signed and under contract. Our head and shoulders best offensive lineman was our nominee for our offensive lineman award. Outside of that, like, nobody is safe pretty much. Sue Chung, I don't think is safe because he's getting up there in age. I think his benefit is being Canadian and being a guy that's serviceable. Like, he's not terrible, but he's also not a game wrecker. I think like he was with Winnipeg, and uh, you know, 2022 he was very good. 2023 he was pretty good as well. But he's also getting up there in age. He's a veteran. I think it can be a good thing, but it can also be a scary thing because we kind of know what he is, and just relying on kind of knowing the standard, I think is maybe a scary thing because you can also take a shot and take a swing on maybe wanting to get better at that position as well. So having a guy like Buck Pierce, being familiar with him and their days in Winnipeg, could be a good thing for him, as well as Michael Couture, another name that's familiar with Buck Pierce as well, could be brought back, but we will see. Um, Interested to know because there's a lot of names that are free agents here, and um, can we bring back three guys? I think is a question, but Blake, we will continue our list with defensive lineman now, and this is another one that's quite a bit of names on there as well. And that'll start with Canadians Josh Archibald, Matthew Betts, Nathan Cherry, and then Americans Josh Banks, Marcus Moore, Pete Robertson, and global Thibaut Tobias. So a lot of names as well, a lot of contributors on there as well. How do you feel about the list of names, Blake, and maybe who are guys that you want to bring back?
Yeah, that's actually a list that I'm not surprised at. The defensive line position, it seems to be a bit of a revolving door, and that's not like a Lions problem. That's a CFL problem where you don't get defensive linemen, it seems, on a very long term contract. I think the obvious name is Matthew Betts, but this might shock some people. Like, I would not be surprised. I will also necessarily wouldn't be upset if the Lions didn't re-sign Matthew Betts. Like, he was plain and simply not good enough once he came back from the NFL along with Nathan Rourke towards the end of the season. Just not the same game record that he was in 2023. Of course, if he could get back to that level, you would love to have him. But I would much rather have a guy like Josh Archibald, Thibaut Debaye, even Pete Robertson before he got hurt was doing a lot more to help the BC Lions than Matthew Betts seemed to do when he came back to the team.
Yeah, for sure. I think you and I both had this conversation towards the end of the year of like needing it and it being a must is I think a little bit of a different conversation. I don't think it's a must to bring back Matthew Betts. I think it's probably a luxury more so at this point. And especially with the way you kind of you can only pay so many guys top dollar. And you've Nathan Rourke's one. You have to kind of decide now on do you want it to be a guy like Matthew Betts? Christian Covington's a guy that you have on the defensive side under contract, isn't breaking the bank by any means, but can you maybe lean on a guy like Christian Covington to be that superstar, that guy on defense, and then you can have money to pay a guy like Justin McInnis, offensive lineman, where you don't have to hand a boatload of money over to Matthew Betts and it's on a game by game basis if he's going to be able to live up to that money or not. Obviously, you could have another dominant year and have another 18 sacks, and it could be really good. But I don't think it's a guarantee by any means. And I think Betts is a good player, but I don't think he is maybe worth leveraging or kind of maybe handicapping you in free agency for because then you're
Mhm.
kind of stuck behind not having enough money. You have to worry about going over once again. The Lions, I don't think, are worried about going over because I think they've went over the cap the last 3 years. I believe if it's not 3 years, it's 2 years for sure. Um, and you know, can you do it? Yes. It's the penalty is not always the first round pick. I think it's if you go over by a certain amount of money, it's the first round pick. So maybe you don't lose the first round pick, and it's just a slap on the wrist fine for a guy like Amar Doman who's willing to pay the fine. But I just don't think it's maybe unless it's at the right price where Matthew Betts is like, hey, this is a place that took an opportunity on me where I was coming off zero sacks in Edmonton, nobody wanted me, and BC kind of gave me an opportunity, and I was able to thrive off that. But I think the thought of wanting to go back home to Montreal, I think, is probably pretty tempting for Matthew Betts. So we will see what happens with one Betts and the rest of the defensive linemen as well. I think there's some names on there that you could bring back, but there's no really names to me that are like must bring backs. Maybe a guy like Josh Banks, but I think he's a guy that defensive tackle has been a little bit more quieter now as he's getting older. He's starting to get, injuries starting to prop up now as well. And at the defensive tackle position, a position that's really not, um, you don't see a lot of the stats and the
Mhm.
gaudy stuff. You're seeing a lot of the dirty work with a guy like Josh Banks. So let's get to linebackers, Blake. There's only two guys. Bo Lacombo, I'm honestly curious if Bo's going to maybe call it a career, a fantastic career if he does call it, but a national. And then Isaiah Messam, another national linebacker as well. I would imagine it's going to be Ben Haladic, Josh Woods, like they had planned this upcoming year. And, maybe a guy like Bo Lacombo and Messam could come back in some rotational roles. But I'm honestly curious if this might be it for one Bo Sickle Lacombo.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be interesting to see. Bo, of course, kind of lost his starter spot there around the midpoint of the season. He got hurt as well, but once he came back from injury, wasn't able to get that starter spot back. He's getting older, up in age. He's the family man as well, so if he does come back, I wouldn't be upset to see the Lions re-sign him. But neither one of those names, like the Isaiah Messam. I don't even know who that is. So neither one of those names are really anywhere close to must sign for me.
He was a nice guy. We met him up at training camp. Like he went to, if I'm not mistaken, I think he went to Saint FX or maybe or not Saint FX, Saint
Okay.
Mary's. St. Mary's, I believe. But a national linebacker. I don't know if he dressed for too many games, if I'm being honest. But let's get to DBs, which is another list similar to offensive linemen. A lot of names. I'm not too sure if you're maybe expecting how many names are going to be coming, especially starters. I know we talked about it though, and we're very critical of the position all year. But DBs, we'll start with Canadians. Start with Adrian Green and Patrice Rene, two rotational safeties. Obviously, Adrian Green was the starter to begin the year, lost that position to Christophe Boyu. Patrice Rene played some safety, also played a little bit of Sam, special teams guy, a contributor for the BC Lions. I think this guy could be a guy that you maybe want to bring back, especially because he's Canadian as well. A guy that's effective on special teams, can play safety, can play Sam, can really fit into the defense if injuries happen, that sort of thing. But Americans, Blake. Jalen Edwards Cooper, Deontay Evans, TJ Lee, Gary Peters, Emmanuel Rugamba. Obviously, basically four starters right there. Jalen Edwards Cooper, Deontay Evans, Gary Peters, TJ Lee, and Emmanuel Rugamba. Pretty much, you know, you could argue all those guys had starting experience outside of
Hmm.
Patrice Rene really didn't have too much starting experience, but all those guys, meaningful contributors to the secondary. And I think this is going to have a big say whether or not Ryan Phillips comes back. If Ryan Phillips comes back, I think they probably lean towards maybe bringing Gary Peters, TJ Lee, guys that have been there, done that, those kind of vets back. But I think if Ryan Phillips doesn't come back, all cards are on the table that maybe not even Ryan or TJ Lee and Gary Peters, guys that are you know like possibly like Ring of Honor type guys, like guys that have
Yeah.
been with the organization for a long time, done a lot of good things. Obviously, unfortunately for them, and honestly, should probably give more credit to them that they rode it out through some of the tough years, some of the tougher times for this organization, and didn't want to jump ship. Obviously, Gary coming over from Edmonton, TJ Lee, BC Lion lifer, if not mistaken. All
I
he
believe
knows in
so.
a BC Lion. So guys that those 2017, Devon Claybrook years, that sort of stuff, Jeff Tedford, all those kind of down years and stuff like that after the
Oof.
2011
Jeff
and yeah,
Tedford.
not to remind us, they could have very easily jumped ship. Like they could have, with the how short the CFL contracts are, they've had multiple times to, go elsewhere in free agency, and it's just the thing that I'm probably the most bummed about for those guys is that we couldn't win them a Grey Cup, that we couldn't capitalize
Hmm.
their kind of career and look back at, them as like similar to, Corey Banks and Ryan Phillips and Dante Marsh and the way that we look at those guys about, they brought championships to the BC Lions. Gary Peters and TJ are still great players and will be forever remembered as great BC Lions, but it's just unfortunate that we can't say that they were, Grey Cup champions as well. But what do you think about the secondary, Blake, and maybe those two guys specifically?
Yeah, no, like I think the way you said it was perfect, Cole. Like it really depends on what happens with RP because for me, almost all six of those guys are must sign. But if RP comes back, then I think it's probably TJ Lee and Gary Peters and maybe Adrian Green. But if not, if it's a new defensive coordinator, then I think either way, Adrian Green comes back, but then maybe it's a guy like Patrice Rene that comes back as well. So that'll be interesting to see. Really, I don't have many thoughts on that position other than we'll have to wait and see what happens with Ryan Phillips before we can form a guess on that.
I think another important guy that we saw, and I think a guy that probably is going like this as well, an upward trajectory is Manny Rugamba. Manny
Yep.
Rugamba kind of being able to be a Swiss Army knife in many ways for the BC Lions the last few years of playing Sam, playing field half, and now making the move over to boundary half, which is probably probably the hardest position, whether you want to put boundary half or boundary corner, one of the hardest positions in football. Boundary half more specifically is just like you're on the short side of the field of the CFL, you're going to get a lot of targets, and you are backpedaling, trying to cover a guy that is running full speed, getting a waggle at you, and he has an idea where he's going, and you have no idea where he's going. So it's like Van Gamba being able to do that and play pretty damn good. When TJ Lee kind of made the switch to Sam linebacker, is like, man, Manny Rugamba is very valuable at that position, and I think he is probably a guy that I'm looking at as like, man, do we want to let that guy walk out the door and go, you know, be like an all-star somewhere else because we don't know like what he's what his next level is. So another younger guy that the BC Lions found, right? I wouldn't be surprised if it was a guy like Ryan Rigmaiden that found Manny Rugamba, a guy that's an American, played high level Division One football, probably had hopes to go into the NFL, and probably got picked up at one of these scouting camps that Rigmaiden kind of runs and attends throughout the many different states in the United States, trying to find guys that want to come to the CFL. I wouldn't be surprised if Manny Rugamba was another one of those guys that you could add to the list. And hopefully that is for our case, and hopefully he doesn't want to let him out of the door. But a position that we were very critical on, wanting to wanting to see more turnovers from them because they were kind of at that level a few years ago. But it'll be interesting to see Blake last position before we get out of here, and probably don't have to spend too much time other than wanting to bring back. I think one guy you could honestly probably bring back all three, but all three specialists are free agents, Blake. So Stephen Flintoff, Sean White, and Terry Williams are all free agents going into next year. I think it's probably pretty obvious bringing back Mr. Automatic is a must. I think having him after another phenomenal, unfortunate for him, robbed of not I don't know if robbed is the right word because Janarian Grant is a demon. That is there's no taking away from Janarian Grant. But like Sean White had a phenomenal year, and to not be named the most special teams player of the year is
Back
like pretty much
back years he lost to Janarian, isn't it?
like I don't is robbed maybe like the wrong way to maybe say it, but like he pretty much got robbed.
Yeah, no, like
Any other year he's the most outstanding special teams player of the year.
yeah, like he said that last year at the awards, at the Grey Cup in Hamilton. I saw him after the awards that night when he lost Special Teams Player of the Award, Player of the Year last year as well. And he was like, "Man, how much better do I have to be to win the award?" He was better this year, and he still lost to Janarian Grant. But no, I think for sure you sign Sean White. That's probably like priority two, priority three, maybe. Steph Flintoff, he was fine. He was a punter. Like if we talked about Steph Flintoff way too much this year, so if we talk about him less, that's a good thing because that means he's not punting. So
Like,
I'd sign Steph Flintoff. Honestly, Terry Williams. 2023 was a lot better year for him. He had a lot more plays that made you get out of your seat. 2024 just wasn't good enough for Terry Williams, and I would be just as fine seeing him walk out the door if I'm being completely honest.
yeah, me too, Blake. So that is it, Blake. We are not going to get into free agents that we want yet. We will maybe save that for another day because especially we don't think CFL free agency will open up until the new year.
Yeah,
Actually, I don't think.
February 15th, February 12th, I believe, is the first day.
I know for a fact. So we will save that for another day. Blake and I will maybe put together like a mock off season that Blake and I would like to do if we were general managers of the BC Lions. So stay tuned for that. That is about an hour from Blake and I. We talked pretty much all things to get you ready for the off season. Though we talked, Vernon Adams trade. We actually didn't talk too much Rick Campbell, which is probably a good thing to be honest. Talked Ryan Rigmaiden named 17th general manager for the BC Lions. We talked 28th head coach of the BC Lions, Buck Pierce. Um, I think probably the last thing to do is just maybe a little bit of a direction talk, and probably is the only way to start and end the conversation is just I think this direction is headed offensively with Nathan Rourke and Buck Pierce being the two guys that are going to be kind of the two faces that you're going to see at the front of this organization from now on of the direction they want to head and kind of want to sell to the fan base into the market. And I'm excited. I think this is a good vision, a good opportunity for them to, young minded, offensive minded head coach. I think Buck Pierce is only just over 40, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Yeah.
hopefully this is the start of a 20-year BC Lions stint as head coach, multiple Grey Cups. And I'm excited to see kind of where the new direction is. As much as there's a little bit of like the unknown there, I think it's a little bit more exciting unknown because like hopefully there's greatness at the end of the
Yep.
the journey here for the BC Lions. I think there is, as we said, this was a much better football team than they played and that they finished the year. I wholeheartedly will die on the grave that this was a much better team than a 9-9 football team and out in the first round of the West semis. Um, a few plays go the other way. I think they could have very well been Grey Cup champions, as crazy as that sounds. Um, as we talked about, of the 20 or so names of free agents that are on the BC Lions, this year, it's like all 8 other franchises have to do the same thing. We could also bring back a lot of these guys, right, and kind of run it back in a sense, right, where we had that
Mhm.
team last year. I don't necessarily think that's probably the right thing to just run it back, which is a new head coach and new general manager. I think running it back with some tweaks and some new faces, I think is probably the most comfortable thing for me personally. But change is always also good, Blake. So, um, what are your final thoughts, buddy, for the BC Lions going into 2025?
Yeah, I would agree with most of what you said, Cole. Running it back just isn't the right option. As we saw over the past 25, 30 minutes, the few names that I was like, you know what, just let the door hit them on the way out. Like, so running it back with a few tweaks, with a new head coach, obviously, with a QB1 that we know for sure 100% is going to be QB1. And we'll wait and see what happens starting in February. And then we get to the combine in March, the draft in April. And then before we know it, Cole, we're going to blink. It's going to be May, it's going to be June, and the season's going to be here again.
Is it flipping June yet, Blake? That's what I want to know, man, because it's been crazy, man. It's only been a couple weeks, but it's like that off season like blues, but it's also like
I know.
I've recorded a couple of shows, so it's like there's still news and there's still tough, but there's still stuff to talk about. But it's like there's no games on the weekend, which is I think the most like, man, like I look forward to just kind of getting home on Thursday, Friday. Obviously summertime, the Thursday night games, but and it's a bummer that there's no games on during the weekends. Although I will, I guess, shameless plug, sneak in, and the Buffalo Bills are looking like a flipping wagon like right now, Blake, which I'm loving. So
Seahawks are still winning games. They're finding ways to win.
they are. They actually helped out my Buffalo Bills, making the Jets look like dummies there the other week. I love that one.
The Jets
Um,
did that all to themselves, but
they did. They did. That. What was it? 21-0 or something like that. I was like, what the heck is?
21-7.
I
And
was
they,
like, what
they
the
were
heck?
they were driving to make it 28-7 before that pick six.
I was like, what the heck is going on right now, man? Like, I was like, man, Seattle's gonna get a win today. Help me out. And then I was like, I checked in the score. I was like, what? I was not expecting that. But CFL platform. So let's get back to Canadian football, the good old brand of Canadian football, Blake. This will be one of, not too sure how we're gonna release it, but one of either 3 or one of 9, depending on if we're gonna release. So we're gonna do off-season primers for all 9 teams, all the 8 other ones. Uh, TBD, we're not too sure yet if we're going to release that in a Western and Division part, so 1 and a 2 part, or we're going to release that by team. So we might just release 8 straight episodes other than the BC Lions one. Obviously, you can see Blake and I's pretty face for the BC Lions. And we will not yet announce all of our other 8 guests for the other 8 remaining franchises, but we'll be joined by 8 other guests and kind of just do a similar discussion to the one Blake and I just had. Kind of talk about kind of maybe ask our said guests a few questions that we kind of are curious about, and then kind of go through their free agent list and maybe who they would like to sign, re-sign, all that sort of stuff. And kind of just give you guys a little bit more of a deep dive into kind of the offseason. That's, it is off season. There's not football necessarily, but there is a lot to talk about. Ticats just hired their general manager.
Hmm.
Elks are busy, kind of trying to rival the BC Lions for headline hogs of the off season of we hired somebody, we hired somebody. So a lot of stuff going on, man, and I'm sure it's going to be hot and heavy here. Probably holidays will maybe quiet things down for a little bit for me, a few weeks, but once we get into the new year there, we'll start to hear teams starting to re-sign some people, future contracts, all that sort of stuff. So stick around, and as you can see below, don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, Blake, subscribe. We are I think over 1,400 people followers on Instagram. Combining the Twitter/X, we got to be closing in on 2,000 followers on our social media platforms. So Let's hike up the subscribers on YouTube. I think we are still under 300. So please, guys, it'd be greatly appreciated if you guys subscribed. Starting to edit the Grey Cup blog a little bit, Blake, putting it together a little bit. Unfortunately, I am such a noob at editing. It is going to be in, I guess not. What's portrait mode? It's going to be in portrait mode
Portrait,
instead
yeah.
of landscape mode because I am a noob and I didn't record like this all weekend. I recorded like this, so the video won't be as, I guess, visually pleasing, which is all good because we got some super sweet content. I don't know if actually you know Blake, but we got to talk to guys like Bo Levi Mitchell, excuse me, as I fumble my words. Got him in the vlog, which was pretty cool. Got to ask him a few questions. Coach Paul Lapalisse, a few other
Very nice.
surprise guests down when I was on the field pregame, which was pretty cool. Coach Phil was in there, obviously. Your face as well, obviously, and some cooler stuff, which was kind of fun to film and get behind the scenes footage. So stay tuned for that. Putting that, starting to edit that now. Maybe have that out in a few weeks. Definitely by Christmas. And then it is podcast mode, Blake. I'm starting to record now with a few unannounced guests. We will announce those soon. But some BC Lions guests, some CFL guests, excuse me, some U Sports guests. So stick around for that. Not going to release any of those until the new year. Going to try to record some of those, Blake, and then in the new year probably take a little bit of a break, but pump those out for the people. Well, they think we're busy doing content. I'm actually just pumping out pre-recorded stuff. So that's the plan. Make sure you guys are subscribed, following along on both our Twitter and Instagram platforms. Blake, any final thoughts, buddy? Anything that you want to let the people know that you have going on before we get out of here?
No, just I don't know if I'll see our loyal followers' faces before the holidays, so we don't have to get super political. But I'm one that always says Merry Christmas, not just the whole Happy Holidays. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to all our loyal followers, and we will see you in 2025.
Merry Christmas. Holy smokes, we are in December. I cannot wait. It's a good time. I love this time of year, Blake. I don't know about you, buddy, but excited to talk some football, especially the Canadian Football League. So thank you for joining Blake and I tonight on the BC Lions off-season primer, and we will see you guys in the next video.